In the boundless and intricate history of Middle-earth, two figures loom large as the very embodiments of evil, Sauron and Morgoth. These dark lords are not just feared and despised by the inhabitants of this world. They are the very incarnations of malevolence, shaping the destinies of countless beings through their sinister deeds. While Sauron, the malevolent force behind the events of the Third Age, is widely recognized for his efforts to plunge the world into darkness, it is Morgoth, the original Dark Lord, who casts the longest shadow over Middle-earth. His evil, more profound and all-encompassing, set the foundation upon which all subsequent darkness would be built. Yet, this raises a critical question. Between these two embodiments of evil, who was truly more sinister? In this exploration, we shall embark on a deep and thorough examination of their origins, their wicked deeds, and the lasting impact they left on Middle-earth, in order to discern which of these two Dark Lords rightfully deserves the title of the most evil being ever to have existed. To begin our exploration, we must delve into the origins of Morgoth, originally known as Melkor, who was the mightiest of the Ainur, beings created by Eru Ilúvatar, the supreme deity, before the world was even formed. Among these holy beings, Melkor stood out, not only for his immense strength, but also for his unparalleled wisdom. He was imbued with a grandeur that surpassed all others, possessing powers that spanned the entire spectrum of creation. His deep understanding of the fabric of reality itself allowed him to shape and manipulate the world in ways that were beyond the comprehension of his peers. However, this very strength became his undoing. From the outset, Melkor was driven by an insatiable envy of Ilúvatar, whose power and authority he coveted. Unlike his fellow Ainur, who found fulfillment in the harmonious creation of the world through the great music, Melkor sought to introduce his own discordant themes, driven by a desire to impose his will upon the emerging world. This desire to assert his dominance, rather than contribute to the collective harmony, marked the beginning of his rebellion, a rebellion that would have catastrophic consequences for all of creation. As the world began to take shape, Melkor's lust for power grew unchecked, while the other Valar, his brethren among the Ainur, dedicated themselves to guiding and nurturing the world according to Ilúvatar's divine plan. Melkor harbored a far more sinister ambition. He sought not merely to be a part of creation, but to dominate it entirely, to bend it to his will, and to reshape it in the image of his own dark desires. In pursuit of this goal, Melkor sought the flame imperishable, the secret fire of creation that was held by Ilúvatar alone. However, this ultimate source of creative power eluded him, remaining beyond his reach. This failure only fueled his anger and jealousy, driving him to greater acts of defiance and corruption. Melkor's descent into darkness did not stop there. As he sought to extend his influence over the nascent world, he began to corrupt the very fabric of creation. He spread discord among the Ainur, sowing seeds of mistrust and rebellion. When the Valar descended into Arda, the physical world, to shape it according to Ilúvatar's vision, Melkor followed them, bringing with him a darkness that would taint the world for all time. His presence in Arda was like a shadow that blighted everything it touched, twisting and warping the creations of the Valar to reflect his own malice and spite. His influence was pervasive, spreading corruption and discord wherever he went, and ensuring that his dark legacy would be felt throughout the ages. In stark contrast to Morgoth, Sauron, originally known as Mehron, was a Maya, a lesser, though still powerful spirit, who served Auli, the Valar associated with crafting and smithing. Mehron was initially drawn to Auli's skills and knowledge, finding inspiration in the Valar's ability to shape and create with precision and artistry. For a time, Myron was a loyal and diligent servant, assisting in the construction and ordering of the world. However, Myron possessed a deep-seated desire for perfection and order, which over time began to corrupt his once noble intentions. Unlike Aule, who created out of love and joy, Myron began to crave control, believing that the world could only achieve true perfection through absolute dominion, a belief that would ultimately lead to his fall from grace. When Melkor began to spread his influence across Arda, Myron found himself irresistibly drawn to the Dark Lord's power. It was not just Melkor's strength that captivated him, but the potential for power that could bring about the order Myron so desperately desired. Under Melkor's tutelage, Myron transformed into Sauron, becoming the second greatest of the dark powers. However, Sauron's motivations differed from those of his master. While Melkor was driven by a chaotic desire to dominate and destroy, Sauron sought to impose his own vision of order upon the world, even if that order was maintained through tyranny and fear. Sauron became Melkor's most trusted lieutenant, learning from him the arts of deceit, domination, and manipulation, which he would later wield with devastating effect. The transformation of Melkor into Morgoth, the dark enemy of the world, and Mehron into Sauron, his greatest servant, marked the beginning of a new age of darkness in Middle-earth. Their paths to evil were both rooted in a lust for power and control, yet they manifested in distinctly different ways. Morgoth's evil was characterized by sheer force and a desire to dominate and destroy, whereas Sauron's was more insidious, rooted in the belief that he could bring order to the world through domination. Together, these two dark lords spread their malevolent influence across Arda, setting the stage for the long and bitter struggle between light and darkness that would define the history of Middle-earth. The betrayals committed by Morgoth and Sauron were pivotal in their descent into evil, solidifying their places as the greatest villains in Middle-earth's history. Morgoth's betrayal was cosmic in scale, reverberating through the ages and marking him as the first and greatest Dark Lord. His initial act of betrayal was against his own kind, the Ainur. By attempting to impose his will upon the music of the Ainur, he disrupted the harmony that Ilúvatar had intended. This act was not just a rebellion. It was a fundamental rejection of the natural order, a desire to usurp the role of the Creator himself. Melkor sought to twist the very fabric of reality to serve his own ends, setting himself against all that was good and right in the world. As Morgoth's influence deepened, so too did his betrayals. When he descended into Arda, the world that the Ainur had helped to create, he did not come as a shepherd of creation, but as its greatest adversary. While the Valar sought to shape the world according to Ilúvatar's vision, Morgoth sought to corrupt and control it. He spread his dark influence far and wide, turning the creations of the Valar into instruments of his own malice. One of his most infamous acts of betrayal was the theft of the Silmarils, the greatest works of the Elfëanor. These jewels, which contained the pure light of the two trees, were symbols of all that was good and pure in the world. Morgoth coveted them not for their beauty, but for the power they represented. In stealing the Silmarils, Morgoth not only betrayed the elves, but also defiled the very light of creation. This act plunged the world into chaos, sparking the War of the Jewels and leading to untold suffering and destruction. Morgoth's betrayals were not limited to grand cosmic events, but extended to the personal and the immediate. He betrayed those who had once been his allies, such as Ungoliant, the great spider whom he had enlisted to aid in his dark deeds. After using her to destroy the 2 trees of Valinor, Morgoth denied her the Silmarils she coveted, leading to a deadly confrontation that showcased his treachery even toward those who had aided him. His betrayals were not just acts of evil, but expressions of his deep-seated malice, a desire to dominate and destroy all that was good, even if it meant betraying those closest to him. Sauron's betrayal, while different in scope, was no less significant. Unlike Morgoth, whose betrayal was rooted in a desire to reshape all of creation, Sauron's betrayal was driven by a desire for control and order. His first major act of betrayal was against Aule, the Valar who had nurtured and taught him. By abandoning Aule's service and aligning himself with Morgoth, Sauron turned his back on the values of craftsmanship and creation, choosing instead the path of domination and fear. However, Sauron's greatest act of betrayal came after Morgoth's defeat at the end of the First Age. Instead of seeking repentance or redemption, Sauron chose to carry on Morgoth's legacy, but with his own twisted vision. He sought to dominate Middle-earth not through brute force, as Morgoth had, but through manipulation and deceit. The creation of the One Ring was the culmination of this betrayal. By forging the One Ring, Sauron sought to enslave the minds of all the other rulers of Middle-earth, binding them to his will. This was not just a betrayal of the elves, dwarves, and men, but also a betrayal of the very nature of power itself. Sauron turned the art of creation into an instrument of control, perverting the gifts that had been given to him as a Maya. Sauron's betrayal extended even to those who served him. He promised the 9 kings of men great power and dominion, only to enslave them through the rings of power, turning them into the Nazgul, his most feared servants. His manipulation of Saruman, who sought to rival Sauron but ultimately became his thrall, is another example of Sauron's capacity for betrayal. Even within his own ranks, Sauron sowed distrust and fear, ensuring that no one could ever challenge his rule. In the final analysis, the betrayals of Morgoth and Sauron were not merely acts of evil. They were reflections of their deepest desires. Morgoth's betrayals were rooted in a desire to unmake and remake the world in his own image, while Sauron's were driven by a need to control and dominate. Both sought power, but their methods and motivations differed, shaping the course of Middle-earth's history in unique ways. Their betrayals left scars that would last for ages, affecting not only those who lived during their reigns, but also the generations that followed. The acts of cruelty and destruction committed by Morgoth and Sauron are legendary in the annals of Middle-earth, each leaving an indelible mark on the world and its peoples. Morgoth, as the original Dark Lord, set a precedent for evil that was unmatched in its scale and ferocity. His cruelty was boundless, and his capacity for destruction knew no limits, as he sought to bring all of Arda under his dominion and crush any who opposed him. Morgoth's cruelty is perhaps best exemplified by his creation of the Orcs. In his twisted desire to mock and corrupt the creations of the Valar, Morgoth captured elves, the fairest and noblest of Eru Ilúvatar's children, and subjected them to unimaginable torture and dark sorcery. Through this vile process, he corrupted them into the Orcs, creatures of pure malice and hatred. This act was not just an attack on the elves, but on the very idea of creation itself, as Morgoth took something beautiful and pure and twisted it into something hideous and evil. The Orcs became a symbol of Morgoth's power, a living testament to his cruelty, as they were forced to serve him and carry out his will across Middle-earth. Another of Morgoth's most heinous acts was the unleashing of the dragons, particularly Glaurung, the first of the fire drakes. Dragons were Morgoth's most formidable and destructive creations, embodying his desire for dominance through sheer terror. Glaurung, known as the Father of Dragons, was responsible for countless atrocities, including the devastation of entire regions and the corruption of hearts and minds. Glaurung's influence was most notably felt in the tragedy of Turin Turambar, where the dragon's malice led to a series of events that brought ruin and despair to Turin and those he loved. Morgoth's use of such creatures demonstrated his willingness to unleash unimaginable horrors upon the world to achieve his goals, showing a level of cruelty that transcended mere physical destruction. Morgoth's cruelty extended even to the land itself. During the First Age, he unleashed a series of cataclysmic events that reshaped the very geography of Middle-earth. The War of Wrath, the final conflict between Morgoth and the forces of the Valar, resulted in the sinking of Beleriand, a vast and ancient region of Middle-earth. The destruction of Beleriand was a cataclysm on a scale never before seen, wiping out entire civilizations and forever altering the landscape of the world. This act of destruction was not only a strategic move to hinder his enemies, but also a display of Morgoth's complete disregard for life and creation. His desire to dominate was so overwhelming that he was willing to destroy vast portions of the world he sought to rule. In contrast, Sauron's acts of cruelty, while perhaps less grand in scale, were no less insidious. Sauron's approach to evil was more calculated, focused on control and manipulation rather than sheer destruction. One of his most notorious acts was the corruption of Numenor, the island kingdom of men. Sauron, after being captured by the Númenóreans, used his cunning and deceit to rise to a position of power within the kingdom. He manipulated King Ar-Pharazôn into defying the Valar and attempting to seize immortality, leading to the eventual downfall of Númenor. This act of manipulation resulted in the complete destruction of the island, sinking it beneath the waves and killing nearly all of its inhabitants. Sauron's ability to corrupt an entire civilization through deceit and lies was a testament to his unique brand of cruelty, one that relied on exploiting the weaknesses and desires of others. Sauron's creation of the One Ring was another act of unparalleled cruelty. The ring was designed not only as a tool of domination, but also as a means to enslave the rulers of Middle-earth. By placing a portion of his own power into the ring, Sauron sought to control the minds of those who wore the other rings of power, turning them into his puppets. The 9 rings given to men resulted in their transformation into the Nazgûl, wraiths forever bound to Sauron's will. These once great kings were reduced to mere shadows of their former selves, eternally enslaved by the ring's power. This act of enslavement was one of Sauron's most devious cruelties, as it turned the very essence of power and leadership into a tool of subjugation. Sauron's reign of terror also included the relentless pursuit of the One Ring after it was lost. His obsession with recovering the ring led to the invasion of Middle-earth during the War of the Ring, where his armies of orcs, Easterlings, and Southrons spread death and destruction across the land. The siege of Minas Tirith and the devastation of the Pelennor Fields were among the bloodiest battles of the Third Age, resulting in the deaths of countless warriors and the near destruction of Gondor, the last bastion of resistance against Sauron's tyranny. Sauron's cruelty was not just in the battles he waged, but in the psychological warfare he employed, using fear and despair to weaken his enemies before striking. While Morgoth's cruelty was often direct and overwhelming, Sauron's was more subtle, relying on manipulation and fear to achieve his ends. Morgoth sought to destroy and dominate through sheer power, while Sauron aimed to control and enslave through cunning and deceit. Both approaches resulted in immense suffering and destruction, leaving a legacy of cruelty that would haunt Middle-earth for ages to come. The influence of Morgoth and Sauron over Middle-earth extended far beyond their physical presence, seeping into the very fabric of the world and leaving a lasting impact on its inhabitants. Morgoth's influence was pervasive as it touched nearly every aspect of creation. Being the first and most powerful of the Ainur to fall into evil, Morgoth's corruption began with the great music, where his discordant themes introduced a strain of darkness into the world even before its creation. This corruption was woven into the very substance of Arda, causing the world to be forever marred by his malice. The taint of Morgoth lingered in Middle-earth, manifesting in various forms long after his defeat and imprisonment. Morgoth's influence can be seen in the lingering presence of evil across Middle-earth. The lands of Angband and Utumno, his great fortresses, became centers of darkness and despair, places where his power was concentrated and from which his malice spread. Even after his defeat, the remnants of his evil persisted in the form of his creatures and servants, such as the Balrogs, dragons, and orcs, who continued to plague the world. The shadow of Morgoth's influence was felt in the corruption of men, particularly in the hearts of those who sought power and dominion. The ambition and pride that led the Númenóreans to their downfall can be traced back to the seeds of corruption sown by Morgoth, who had always sought to turn men against the Valar and their own kind. The influence of Morgoth was not just physical, but also psychological. His legacy of fear and despair affected the very spirit of Middle-earth's inhabitants. The elves, who had witnessed the horrors of Morgoth's reign firsthand, were forever marked by the grief and loss they suffered during the Wars of Beleriand. This grief contributed to the gradual fading of the elves and their eventual departure from Middle-earth. Morgoth's influence also manifested in the corruption of the land itself. The blighted and barren regions of the world, such as the desolate lands surrounding Angband and the lifeless wastelands left in the wake of his destruction, were direct results of his corrupting presence. The physical scars left on the world by Morgoth were matched by the psychological scars borne by its people, both of which would persist for ages. Sauron's influence, while rooted in the legacy of Morgoth, took on a different form. Whereas Morgoth sought to corrupt the world on a grand, cosmic scale, Sauron focused his influence on the hearts and minds of the people of Middle-earth. Sauron's ability to manipulate and deceive was unmatched, allowing him to extend his power far beyond what was physically possible. His most significant act of influence was the creation of the One Ring, a device of control that allowed him to extend his will over those who wore the other rings of power. Through the ring, Sauron sought to dominate all of Middle-earth, bringing its rulers under his control and turning them into instruments of his will. Sauron's influence was also felt through his ability to inspire fear and despair. Unlike Morgoth, who ruled through sheer terror, Sauron was a master of psychological warfare. He used fear as a weapon, spreading rumors and lies to weaken the resolve of his enemies. The terror of the Nazgûl, the relentless pursuit of the One Ring, and the dark shadow that spread from Mordor were all tools Sauron used to break the spirits of those who opposed him. His influence was not just in the physical destruction he wrought, but in the way he undermined hope and sowed doubt among his enemies. The influence of Sauron was also seen in the way he corrupted individuals and nations. The fall of Numenor was one of Sauron's greatest triumphs, as he was able to manipulate the entire kingdom into defying the Valar and bringing about their own destruction. Sauron's influence over men was particularly strong as he played upon their fears and desires, turning many to his service with promises of power and immortality. The Easterlings, Southrons, and other peoples who allied with Sauron did so not just out of fear, but also because they had been seduced by his promises of dominion and glory. Sauron's influence was pervasive, affecting not just the lands he ruled directly, but also those far beyond his reach. The legacy of Morgoth and Sauron is one of unending darkness, a shadow that loomed over Middle-earth long after their defeats. Morgoth's legacy was one of corruption on a grand scale, affecting the very essence of the world and leaving a lasting taint that could never be fully cleansed. His influence was felt in the continued presence of evil in Middle-earth, from the lingering shadow of his creatures to the corruption of men. Morgoth's defeat marked the end of the First Age, but his influence persisted, shaping the course of history and setting the stage for the conflicts that would follow. Sauron's legacy, while rooted in Morgoth's, was more focused and insidious. His creation of the One Ring ensured that his influence would continue even after his physical defeat. The ring's power to corrupt and dominate meant that Sauron's will could persist as long as the ring existed. The War of the Ring, fought in the Third Age, was a direct result of Sauron's legacy, as the struggle to destroy the ring became the central conflict of the age. Sauron's influence extended beyond his own time, as the fear and despair he inspired continued to affect the people of Middle-earth even after his defeat. The legacies of Morgoth and Sauron are intertwined, each feeding off the other and shaping the course of Middle-earth's history. Morgoth's legacy was one of grand, cosmic evil, a shadow that tainted the very world itself. Sauron's legacy was one of control and manipulation, a more focused but no less devastating form of evil. Together they represent the two faces of darkness in Tolkien's world, the overwhelming force of destruction and the insidious power of control. Their legacies continue to be felt in the world of Middle-earth, serving as a reminder of the ever-present danger of evil and the need for vigilance in the face of darkness.